Hi, I'm Tracy Stackhouse, and I'm happy to be able to share with you some information about sensory diet. Sensory diet is a concept that we've talked about for about 30 years in the Fragile X community, and it's really a tool of a structure of sensory-based activities that help to reduce anxiety and hyperarousal. And in our current era, with the stressors that are going on that are much more magnified, and with people being at home due to the COVID-19 situation, sensory diets are probably no more important than ever than they are presently. And trying to organize a sensory diet can feel a little bit daunting and overwhelming. So I'm hoping to share some information to make it, to sort of demystify that and help to give a little bit of information about how to create a sensory diet in a doable way. So we use sensory diets as a concept to maintain our wellness. It's kind of a metaphor, the way that meals and snacks maintain our wellness as we eat healthily, we hope, across the day, and as we exercise across the day. Those things maintain our metabolism, and they help us to feel our full sense of wellness. When you struggle with a condition like Fragile X, where you have arousal issues and anxiety as prevalent parts of your daily life, then the idea here is to use a sensory diet, much like you would use a food diet, where you're really on purpose several times a day, fueling your system in a way to combat the arousal or the anxiety. So a sensory diet is really using sensory-based information in a time-scheduled way and picking the sensory activities in a way that are really particularly selected to reduce arousal and to calm anxiety. And to do that frequently throughout the day, just like you would eat to maintain your wellness. So that metaphor is really where the concept of sensory diet came from. Patricia Barger coined the concept of sensory diet. She's an occupational therapist, and usually OTs are the professional that you would go to organize a sensory diet. And truthfully, it's best if you utilize the expertise of an OT who knows your individual child or adult, and that they have that insight that's far more clinical and prescriptive than I can be today, just being general and giving you general guidance. The more prescriptive and targeted and specific the activities are that you put into the sensory diet, really the more powerful and more effective it will be. But we're going to talk today kind of in general, and I'm going to go through activities that are going to help to minimize hyperarousal and promote a sense of calmness, which are really the qualities that most of the time we're going for individuals with Fragile X syndrome. There always could be individual differences, and again, I'm going to give that caveat that I would encourage you to use an OT to help you fine-tune any kind of sensory diet that you're utilizing. So a sensory diet really is a schedule, and what we're looking at here is just a generic schedule. On the left-hand column, what you see are kind of the time markers of the day. So from the time you wake up in the morning until the time you go to sleep. And for some individuals with Fragile X, we're actually thinking about the sensory diet overnight. But that would be a far more prescriptive kind of a sensory diet for somebody who has a sleep disturbance. Generally, we're looking at the time schedule of the day. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put in place really on purpose activities that pair to that time schedule. And if you go through the exercise of thinking about your time schedule and what time do you generally wake up, what does the day proceed to look like, what are the transitions and intervals that are happening, and then if you can start to pair some simple sensory activities to those time scheduled activities or to the transitions, then you can start to infuse the sensory-based information that's going to keep that person less aroused and calmer. And that's really the intention that we're going through. Sometimes in a sensory diet, we'll also make some environmental adaptations or interactional adaptations, but that gets far more sophisticated and can feel a little bit overwhelming. And talk about overwhelming, I'm not going to go through all the neurobiology right now that we know about Fragile X syndrome. This graph kind of summarizes so much of why hyperarousal and anxiety are issues for people with Fragile X syndrome. But what I want to tell you is that the activities we're going to go through have been selected because of the fact that in this dark blue box, there are qualities of sensation that have the capacity to impact the nervous system and to reduce the features that are the biological features that drive hyperarousal and anxiety. And so this is kind of the science slide, but we're going to reserve that for a conference talk or papers that we write. And today we're going to focus a little bit more just on how to organize the sensory diet. So the first thing you want to remember is that this graph is showing you kind of across time on the bottom of the scale, with arousal being the feature on the left-hand side, that individuals with Fragile X across time rise into states of hyperarousal, just like this red line. And the concept of the sensory diet is that we want to come in on a time interval that pushes that arousal back down, pushes it back down, pushes it back down. And we want to try to keep a more baseline steady state through the regular, frequent delivery of calming sensory information that helps the nervous system to recalibrate at a lower level instead of continuing to rise and rise and rise. So it's really helpful for you to think about, for your individual with Fragile X, what does this look like for them? Do they have these spikes upward only when they get really excited and happy, or when transitions are happening? Do they have those spikes upward frequently throughout the day, or is it more just intermittently? The better sense you have of that, the better you're going to do at figuring out the time interval that the sensory diet has to occur in. So how hungry does their system get? Can they go with just 3 meals a day, boom, boom, boom? Or do you have to have something happening much more frequently? That part of it can feel like really the most artful and scientific parts of putting together the sensory diet. But in your schedule, then what you'll do is in this left-hand column, you're going to try to put as many time markers as you need to match that rise scale. And as you organize that, you'll have a far more effective sensory diet. To keep it as simple as possible, we're going to call that our proactive sensory diet. That's the daily schedule that you can anticipate. It could be that it changes from day to day, depending on the circumstances that you're in. So maybe one day you have a dog that you're walking in, so that day looks a little different than a day that you're not venturing out of the house at all. Right now, because we're all homebound, these schedules are going to look a lot more the same day to day. And so your schedule is going to be organized around kind of what's happening. And then you're going to situate the sensory-based activities. And then it's really important to ask yourself, did that seem helpful or not? If it didn't seem helpful, that doesn't mean abandon ship and stop. It means, let me go back and look and see, is there a better activity choice that I could put in there? When you're careful about taking that data, that information about whether it was helpful or not, you'll be far better at fine-tuning this across time. So here's an example of a simple proactive sensory diet. When you wake up, maybe you do some kind of favorite stretching song and then go and brush your teeth And after you've brushed your teeth, maybe you do some wall push-ups and you get some nice grounded proprioceptive information as a part of the routine. So now toothbrushing isn't just toothbrushing, but it's toothbrushing plus the grounding. And that's what we're going for in a sensory diet. We want to put these pieces together and make them habit patterns, make them parts of the routine. And that way it really starts to be that you're living with a sensory diet that helps to manage hyperarousal across time. So now the day proceeds and we go to breakfast and maybe we have, we do 7 minutes of a Cosmic Kids yoga before or after the meal. Then we move into our morning activities. Maybe you're gonna put some stretch resistant bands around the chair that you're sitting in to do home-based school. And every time that there's a break in schedule, you get to do another round of stretches and pulls and heavy resistance. Or maybe you just use your chair and do some push-ups or some pulls. So what we're doing is we're putting in a really on purpose activity to activate the proprioceptors. We're going to talk about that word in a minute. And to give the body the information that it needs to stay in an organized state. Proceeding through the day, maybe we go to lunchtime. And at lunchtime, maybe we do 10 minutes of an activity before we eat. And then in the afternoon, maybe there's an outdoor break and some playground time on the backyard swing set, or maybe you have a jumping spot, or maybe you just take a wagon ride or go for a bike ride. Then at dinner time, maybe you have a weighted basket that you load with the silverware and then go and set the table and come back and get the plates and then go and do the errand of setting the table. And you're adding the weight so that you're adding and increasing the sensory quality in a direction that helps to organize and settle the system down. Then maybe after dinner you spend some 15 or 20 minutes out on the porch, on a porch swing and doing some relaxing. Before bedtime, maybe you're going to sit on the floor and do some commando scoots down the hallway up and down as you get dressed. And again, what we're doing is trying to activate a certain set of sensory processing circuits that help to keep the body grounded and help the body to settle down because of the input that's coming through the nervous system. That's really the concept of a sensory diet. Now that's the proactive sensory diet. You're going to set up a schedule and then put in place activities that match the flow and kind of the context that you're in, the room you're in, or the space that you're in. What materials do you have around you that you can implement? The other way that you can use a sensory diet is to do it more responsively. So this would be where you would be identifying the daily activity. Maybe again, it's breakfast time or school time or art class or whatever it happens to be. And in a responsive sensory diet, what you would be doing would be identifying what's the challenge associated to that activity, and then put in the sensory support related to the challenge. So in this way, you're not just proactively managing hyperarousal all day long, but you're targeting the sensory input around the challenge in particular. Again, it's helpful to take data on whether or not that was helpful. So in this way, we can see this example where somebody might wake up in the morning and they're a little grumpy. So maybe we pick their favorite music to do a movement routine and help them use that movement and that music to kind of shift their attitude a little bit. So in this way, we're choosing something that's a little more responsive. And then it may become a part of the proactive sensory diet when you find that it's quite helpful and it makes sense to include it as a regular part of what you're doing. In other ways, you may have situational things that are going on where you're going to put in place a sensory diet activity that is responsive to that moment or that situation, but may not need to become a part of the regular ongoing proactive sensory diet. So most people with Fragile X syndrome are going to need both the proactive and the responsive qualities to their sensory diet. And whatever activities you choose, you always want to make sure that you're kind of loading it in the direction of more rhythm, because rhythm is quite organizing and calming to the nervous system. So any of the activities that we go through, I want you to think about them in terms of their rhythmic quality. You also want to have the intention that the activity is calming and feels really good, that you're not doing something that feels disruptive. Remember also that individuals with Fragile X learn best by doing things with them, not doing things to them or telling them what to do. That means for a successful sensory diet, you're probably going to be doing the activities with them, at least until there's some level of habit and routine established, because otherwise it just won't be very successful in your implementation. We're going to go through some common activities that are quite safe most of the time, but if you have any questions, you want to stop and make sure you ask your occupational therapist or send an email to myself or even to the foundation, and Jane will try to help you as well. I'm volunteering you, Jane. So proprioceptive input is information that activates muscle and joint receptors. It also can be thought of as pressure input. And here you see children doing a variety of different kinds of proprioceptive activation. One little boy there's a rope hooked on a door and he's pulling. And this could be a routine that got set up. You hook the rope up to the door and then you go and you do 20 pulls. You could do it to music, you could do it to rhythm, you could do it in taking turns. This little girl in the upper right-hand side is holding her finger and squeezing, and she's using a strategy that she learned, which was a stop strategy. Stop and squeeze and hold. The picture of the young boy at the bottom, I'm giving him pressure into his chest. Sometimes we have to deliver proprioception. And when we do that, we're going to be careful not to squeeze or use our fingers, but we're giving nice, firm, even pressure. And again, I'm going to think about that rhythmic quality. Pressure can come through our mouths when we suck and blow. We'll talk about some of those activities. Pressure can come in the form of activation. We call that heavy work. So this is where you're pushing and pulling or activating your limbs. You can get pressure like this, where this child is getting pressure from a therapy ball. I'm going to be really careful to keep joints protected so that I'm not pushing right on the joint. And I'm not obviously doing any kind of pressure that would be hurtful to the child or compress their breath mechanism or their internal system. But it's even steady pressure, the way that you might deliver a massage. You can get pressure by heavy work by moving things, like this little boy who's organizing the cans, doing chores at home that are heavy work chores, laundry baskets, pushing and pulling things, lifting things, organizing things. Doing simple exercises are also all ways that you can activate the pressure system. This little one is underneath some pressure lycra sheet, and that's contained pressure is often quite organizing, like you see this little one wrapped up in a blanket. We can wrap up in lycra or blankets and snug them around us. I could take my scarf and snug it around me or tug it around me. There are sometimes special things that are made, like weighted vests or pressure snug vests. This is Percy the platypus, who's a friend of mine from Australia, and he is a weighted heavy, like a weighted lap pad. And those heavy weighted tools are often quite helpful and often included in a sensory diet. We can activate pressure just in our hands with fidget toys or things like Play-Doh. Doodling has actually been shown to be quite effective as a way to settle the nervous system. And so this is something that you can easily promote and add to a sensory diet. Oral sensory inputs like blowing activities, blowing a cotton ball, blowing bubbles, chewing things that you might buy, or just having crunchier kinds of snacks are all things that can be helpful. And there are a lot of different kinds of games that you can play with blowing. Also, many of our individuals with Fragile X syndrome do well with something either really intense in their mouth, like this little guy is eating mustard, or something colder. Something cold in your mouth is particularly calming to the nervous system, and sustained chewing is particularly calming to the nervous system. So you might need to assemble some things that you have on hand and are ready to have at the draw when you need them. We also use a lot of breath work in a sensory diet. So a lot of our individuals can't really just take a breath without learning how to do that. So you may have to help them practice like box breathing, where you breathe in, hold it, and breathe out and hold it. Learning to do that in, out with holding is quite organizing to the nervous system, but often takes quite a bit of time. So we often have to supplement that with other kinds of games where we're working on blowing. As you blow your air out, if you just do that with me now, what precedes that is a big breath in. And that big breath in then can go to another breath out. So a lot of times our individuals with Fragile X need to learn how to do deep breathing, and blowing out is often the first step of that. And then they can learn to extend and exhale by feeling their breath or putting something on their tummies to feel that. Fairly commonly we talk about, smell the flowers and blow out the candle. But that breathe out, breathe in process is something that we often have to really focus on. Movement is also something we can put into our sensory diet. So if you have access to a swing, that's wonderful. Otherwise, sitting on a ball, or even like a desk chair that I have, where you can have a little bit of movement just in the course of being sitting. And then you can add movement activities with a lot of things that are online now, like the Fit 5 from Special Olympics, Me Moves, any kind of dance routine. There are so many of them out there now, and a lot of really safe, good quality things on YouTube. So you can spend a few minutes just looking at those, and that can be quite helpful. A little bit of inversion can be quite calming to the nervous system. You don't want to spend, a long time here, but even 3 or 4 minutes at a little bit of inversion, like here on this big pillow, where we get just a tiny bit of head inversion, not full inversion, but a little bit of head inversion, and just reading a book or coloring or playing a game with just a tiny bit of a head inversion can be quite calming to the nervous system. A lot of our kids like to sit on the couch and then put their head down and kind of work on the floor, and they're really trying to get that calming input. Being outside in nature is really shown to be one of the most organizing things for our arousal and attentional systems. So doing heavy work outside, or just going for a walk in the park. Again, now we have to do that with all kinds of precautions, but it's still a really critical part of a sensory diet. In the auditory arena, we can really be looking at just using situational reduction. Sometimes that is necessary for some of our individuals, but any music is quite organizing. Therapeutic listening has a particular series of music that is available that is called a quick shift, and that is organizing information. I would highly recommend using the regulation series of the quick shifts as a possible adjunct to your sensory diet, and that's quite safe to use for most individuals. Again, you would want to consult with your occupational therapist if you have any questions. So often in a sensory diet, we're putting in sensation, but sometimes we have to remove sensation, like the headphones or covering lights. Often in your own home environment, you've already figured that out. So we don't have to manage it as much right now. But as you notice if there are triggers for your individual, it's important to try to help them reduce that. And then it's always critical to have a calm, soothing place to go to, because living with Fragile X is hard, and sometimes you just need a place to go regroup. And we like to put this into the sensory diet. So go use your cozy corner after you've done that really hard math class, and let yourself soothe and calm down and feel good again before you proceed. So again, the sensory diet is really all about the schedule and then the consistent use of these inputs, finding what works and then maintaining it through habits and routines. And that is really the art of the sensory diet. So please let us know if you have questions, and we'll look forward to checking in with you next time and sharing additional information in the coming weeks. Thank you.